Welcome to the Putback on SNY.TV. I'm Ian Begley, SNY NBA Insider, and we're here to talk Knicks and the NBA. And today we're taking questions from you guys. So, got my buddy Matt Spenley with me. Matt, SNY Digital Extraordinaire, also a very, very knowledgeable Knicks fan. You might know his work from the Knicks wall, but we'll be talking Knicks here and NBA, answering your questions. Matt, where are we starting today?
All right, Ian, we're going to start out with the end of the Knicks' 9-game winning streak. Obviously, a disappointing loss to the Hornets. So what's your biggest takeaway from the end of the streak? We knew it would come to an end eventually, but what is your biggest takeaway from their loss, and what's your mindset as they head out to the West Coast?
Yeah, the loss to me, what stood out was Josh Hart after the game talking about how the Knicks didn't really share the ball and like they didn't have the energy that they needed. Energy comes from sharing the ball, he was saying. So he said, we can learn from this and we can bounce back from it. But I thought it was interesting that he made that point. Obviously, Jalen Brunson out, and obviously Knicks coming off a double OT win against Boston. So it's understandable that the energy there would be lacking, but Josh Hart didn't want to use that as an excuse. Neither did Emmanuel Quickley. Quickley said he just had to play better. Bottom line, he had to be better that night. And it seemed like he was dragging. Julius Randle, it seemed like he was dragging as well. So I would assume now, here we are, Thursday, a couple days removed from it. Knicks flying out to the West Coast for the Kings on Thursday night. I would assume the energy is going to be there tonight. Knicks have been a very good road team, very good road team. They share the best road record in the NBA with the Bucks and with the Celtics at 20-12. So look for them to be much more competitive tonight against the Kings.
And big nod to you, Ian, for your Josh Hart video. Over 3.5 million views from our Knicks Twitter account. I mean, not too bad, not too bad. All right, as we look ahead to Sacramento with the lack of Jalen Brunson on the lineup, I know you mentioned the energy, and he's been such an impetus for what they had to do. Do you think that you learned anything new about the team? I know for me, I think the way that RJ Barrett played was notable without Brunson on the floor, with the ball in his hands more. What are you looking for, especially if Brunson's out again tonight as the Knicks play in Sacramento?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll see Quickley play better than he did the other night in the loss at home. I think he'll be much better in Sacramento. And I think also to your point with RJ, I think RJ Barrett, he said it after the game. He felt like he was making good reads, getting the team and himself good shots with the ball in his hands when Charlotte was coming to double him, coming to trap him and get the ball out of his hands. He felt like he made the right play more often than not, and the good shots were had. It was just a matter of the Knicks missing shots. And so I think that's a good sign for Barrett and for the Knicks, because you do see at times he is running that second unit. He's got the ball in his hands with Josh Hart on the floor. And so he'll continue to have that role, especially with Jalen Brunson's out. And I think you look to him to play make with that second unit. And the Knicks, maybe they make shots tonight against Sacramento that they missed against Charlotte. But I think it's a good sign, RJ Barrett making the right reads. And he wasn't shooting well in that second half, but I think the shots were more often than not quality shots.
Absolutely. And I think he'll be notable to keep an eye on as they go out. One other thing on the loss to Charlotte, obviously, Julius Randle, a tough game, season low percentage from the floor in that one. Do you think that there's anything on a macro level with the Knicks to be said about when a guy like Brunson is out or a guy like Randle is out? I mean, I think a lot of Knicks fans now, given what Brunson has brought to the table, would say that Brunson is probably the more valuable guy in terms of what you're missing on the floor when he's not there. But do you think there's anything that we could take away from Brunson being absent that, just says more about the team in general and its build?
I think you look at Quickley and the way he played over the stretch with Brunson out, and even when Brunson's off the floor, the way he plays, he's grown a lot. But in general, Julius Randle, I think, benefits so much from Jalen Brunson's presence, and that was reinforced by that Charlotte game. Because to me, Brunson, not only he takes the load off of Randle in terms of, how the Knick offense the past 2 years, the ball was going through Julius Randle every possession. He takes that off of Randle's plate, but he also takes some of the scoring burden away from Randle. And I think that dynamic, maybe it's been a little bit under discussed here, but that was glaring for me based on what we saw against Charlotte. And then, Deuce McBride will get minutes with Brunson out. And let's just say this now, Brunson is questionable for the game. So I think he probably is trending toward playing, given how things have gone over the past few days. But McBride getting minutes there, I think he's been solid, but he's not the scorer that the Knicks would have. Obviously, if Brunson's in there and the rotation looks the way it does, maybe the Knicks will look to get a little more from McBride if Brunson is out, or maybe more from Barrett as a ball handler in that second unit. But obviously, big shoes to fill if the Knicks are without Brunson again tonight against Sacramento.
Yeah, I think McBride is one of those guys that usually grades out pretty well when we're talking about being a positive impact on lineups. The Knicks have been better with him on the floor, but in terms of a tangible impact, he usually is not one of those guys that's going to fill up the stat sheet. So we'll see how his role will be if Brunson's out. To kind of talk about the Eastern Conference writ large as we get down to the final 15 games for the New York Knicks, and as the NBA season kind of ramps up to solidify some seeding. Jack Clafter on Twitter is asking, how likely is a top 3 finish in the East for the Knicks? Unlikely at this point, but in terms of when we're talking about that 3, 4, 5, 6, where they might end up finishing, how do you see the Eastern Conference playing out, Ian?
Yeah, I think you look at this Knicks schedule, right, and it's road heavy, and they've had success on the road, and they got a big game against Cleveland in the end of this month. But just looking at the schedule, the way they've played, I think they have a good chance to sneak up on Cleveland and get past them, move into fourth, although Cleveland's schedule is the easiest in the NBA according to Tankathon. That's based on opponent winning percentage. So I think that you could see a pathway to 4. But also, you look at the Nets. I think they're going to probably lose tonight to Milwaukee. It looks like they're kind of punting on that game. But the way that Mikal Bridges has played, I would obviously be concerned if I'm the Knicks or a Knicks fan about them being so close to me in the standings. I think if I had to predict today, right, I would assume the Knicks stay at 5th and they play Cleveland in the first round. Things top 3 finish seems to be pretty out of reach at the moment. But again, keep an eye on Brooklyn. To me, not tonight so much, but over the next few weeks, because they've been playing well. And they're right there, game behind New York. So certainly nothing settled here with 15 games to go.
Nailed it. Yeah, I think with Mikal Bridges, too, he's been an absolute stud for Brooklyn. I've always loved his game back to the Nova days when him and Brunson obviously played together. Perfect transition, though, because Dirty Dancer on YouTube is asking, would the Knicks' record have been better if they acquired Donovan Mitchell this offseason? Hypothetical, right? But I think my question more so is, how would these guys have progressed if Mitchell had come to the Knicks? Because I think it's fair to say Brunson would not have had the season that he's had if Mitchell was here, given their ball handling responsibilities, what Brunson's been able to accomplish. Even Julius Randle, who, as you mentioned before, has benefited a ton from the presence of Jalen Brunson. A guy like RJ probably wouldn't have been here, as you've reported in the past. So how do you think things would have gone differently? And if that is the matchup in the first round, I mean, that's a pretty fun narrative to be following.
Yeah, a lot to talk about if that is the case. But I think certainly you look at Randall, as you said, Matt, and you also look at Brunson. But to me, I think Emmanuel Quickley might have been the biggest player impacted if Donovan Mitchell were here. I mean, obviously depending on the trade, but let's say hypothetically Quickley wasn't in the trade and he remained here in New York. His role would be smaller, playing time would be smaller, and I think that if he's here and Quickley's here, those trade talks about the Quickley that the Knicks had with teams early on in the season probably would have been more serious, because you're looking at this roster and you're not seeing a clear pathway to big minutes, a big role for Emmanuel Quickley with Donovan Mitchell here. So yeah, it's so much would have been different, I think, for this club. Would the record have been better? It's hard to say without throwing out like hypothetical trades that bring Mitchell here, because then you know who's coming out, who's going to be here. But certainly you're not seeing the same Julius Randle, you're not seeing the same Jalen Brunson, and you're definitely not seeing the same Emmanuel Quickley with Donovan Mitchell here. And in a big picture sense, the Knicks obviously will remain engaged on the trade front, and if any significant player decides to saber rattle and says that he wants out, Knicks will be engaged on that. But now, Quickley's trade value much higher today, maybe than it was in the offseason. So that's just something to consider, the way that outside teams look at some of these young players now after this season, the strong year the Knicks have had. That's just a factor moving forward in any trade talks you're going to discuss.
Yeah, I think you look at Quickley. You mentioned how well he's played. I mean, especially the game against Boston, he was fantastic. I think his biggest growth this year, the defensive element has been tremendous, and I think he's really taken a step forward. I think for me, watching him in the past, I think his finishing kind of from that 2 point zone when he's not relying on that floater and using his strength inside has been something I think he's had to grow upon, but I've just been so impressed with his game this year, and I think he's made a lot of strides. On that note, when we're talking about sixth manual Quickley, sixth manual of the year, Emmanuel Quickley. Shouts to our guy Sean from the Knicks wall. I know he's become the favorite now to win the award, which I think he was, a 30-1 a month ago. And he's become the favorite over Malcolm Brogdon. I think a lot of times a nationally televised game where he goes off like that helps. But, Ian, how do you see that race playing out? And I mean, if Quickley continues to play this well, do you think that he'll kind of run away with the award?
Look, if he continues to play at the level that he had over the past month, and the Knicks continue to win and they end up 5 or 4, he's got a very strong case because of where the Knicks were last season and where they are now. And so, to me, impacting winning and impacting the bottom line should matter just as much as your individual statistics. And Quickley would have checked both boxes if he continues to play at this pace, especially the way that he has impacted the Knicks since they went to that 9-man rotation in early December. And, you look at his plus minus, his net rating, it's just phenomenal. It's off the charts. And when you compare that to the net ratings of a Brogdon or a Norman Powell or a Bobby Portis, Tyrese Maxey, to me, is an interesting case because I don't know if he'll end up playing more games off the bench than he will as a starter. Depends on how Doc Rivers rolls out his lineups from here on out. There's a chance that he gets to that threshold, and that's the threshold to be eligible for the sixth man award. So Maxey, bit of a wild card. But in this hypothetical that we're discussing, to me, he's right there with Brogdon and everybody else for that award.
Yeah, I think we will see how the season plays out. And I got one more on Quickley because I know it's something that you've repeated throughout the year when we've talked about Toppin and Quickley. And obviously it's become clear that Quickley is a more integral part of what the Knicks are trying to accomplish at this point. And I know last week or a couple weeks ago, you had mentioned that you expect the Knicks are going to do their best to keep Emmanuel Quickley around. So on that note, you've said consistently it's going to be Toppin or Quickley. Do you still get that sense that they are going to go in this summer viewing Quickley as someone that they need to extend when he becomes extension eligible and keep around? And does that make Obi more likely to be a guy that, they're really trying to not push out, but you know what I mean, put more on the block?
Yeah. So I think that with Quickley, I mean, just a guess here, they would be aggressive in trying to get him to sign that extension this summer. And Quickley, based on the way he's played, I would assume that he's not going to be settling for any kind of a team-friendly extension in those talks. So we'll see where they go. With Toppin, I mean, look, they could have moved him at the trade deadline. There were, I think, talks with several teams about Toppin trades. So they had an opportunity to move him at the deadline. They chose not to. Maybe that's because they see a way for them to either retain him on a second contract, whether it's an extension or more likely restricted free agency. Maybe they would just do a qualifying offer and then have him get into restricted free agency next summer. But clearly with Toppin, there's not a role for him where he can get more than 15 minutes a night with this team as long as Julius Randle's here and he's playing the way that he is. And I don't expect that to change. So I don't see an obvious path for Obi Toppin and his minutes to expand. That's why I would assume that the Knicks at least continue to listen if teams are going to call on Obi Toppin and listen to what they want to offer. I think the Knicks, they were asking for a significant amount at the deadline. They weren't going to settle for anything less. So I would assume that continues to be a high bar. But, yeah, you have to at least listen on Toppin, given everything in play here, everything we discussed. And, look, maybe they see a pathway where they have a number in mind for Toppin on an extension that they feel is good for them and they can lock him in. I mean, that would be great from a continuity standpoint. But it's a conundrum because of Randle and because of the money that you already have committed to the players on your roster.
Yeah, it feels like the more time that's gone on, we've kind of known that Randle Toppin dynamic has led to an eventual inevitability. So we'll see how that ends up playing out. Ian, one other question on a guy we brought up before, Josh Hart. Kudos to your viral clip once again from our Knicks Twitter account, and his quote
That was a
about
team effort, by the way.
it was
Credit to
fantastic.
everybody.
It was fantastic. We appreciate it. On Hart, I know there's been we've speculated throughout since the Knicks acquired him that he'll become a free agent this offseason, decline that option, and the Knicks will look to sign him to a new contract. I guess just your thoughts on Hart at this point. I expect that will be the same, but do you have any additional thoughts on Josh Hart and his future with the Knicks, considering how well it's gone?
I mean, just based on what he has said in response to questions about it, and then all the dynamics at play with Hart being obviously Leon Rose's former client and the Knicks, then to me, having an advantage on having some kind of idea about what Hart might do in free agency. I don't think they're going to attach a first, send out Cam Reddish to Portland to get Josh Hart without some idea that there's a good shot at them making this a more longer term partnership. And Hart, everything he said publicly, I mean, he's on board. And I think if somebody could find him a membership at Wingfoot, I think he maybe would sign on day one of free agency, because he talked a lot about wanting to play golf at Wingfoot. But yeah, on the court, everybody sees it, right? He just seems like such a good fit for this team, for this head coach, for the way this team plays, for what they needed. He just seems to fill in so many gaps. And so, I mean, look, if things continue the way they have gone since Hart's been here, to me, it seems like a no-brainer. It's just a matter of coming to a figure that makes sense for both sides. And then, it's another big, long, multi-year deal that's on your books. If you're the Knicks, it gives you a little bit less flexibility in terms of being a tax team and the implications there. But if you want to win, Josh Hart's helping you win. So to me, it would make a lot of sense for him to come back. He's even talked about the idea that I believe his wife is pregnant. Congratulations to the Hart family, and wanting to be close to family. And I think being in New York would allow him to be close to family. So many different factors that point to this being a longer term partnership than just the next few weeks, few months.
Yeah, and I think we should expect that. I'm certainly expecting it, given the way he's spoken about it. All right, Ian. So we're looking ahead. The Knicks have Sacramento tonight. They've got some games out on the West Coast. What's the number one thing that you're looking for on this road trip? What should we keep an eye out for? I know we mentioned it at the top of the show, but just kind of what do you have your eye on?
Yeah, if Brunson's back, I would be curious to see, is he limited at all by the foot? I'm sure the Knicks want to get him to a place where it's not going to be a recurring thing, and he's not going to be dealing with any soreness with the foot. Tom Thibodeau said a few days ago that there's no MRI for Brunson, just been treatment, so that's a good sign. But if and when he's back, is he limited? Does he have to get his wind back a little bit? Or does he come back in the same way that he came back from that hip ailment at the end of the calendar year and just playing incredibly well? So that's certainly something for me that I'm going to be keeping an eye on as they play these games. And then something else that I think was notable from that Charlotte game is, the rebounding and the defense really was not there in the second half. And I think that didn't sit well with a lot of people with the Knicks. And so could they get back to where they have been for much of this season on defense and as a strong rebounding team? And obviously to win on the road, you really need to nail down those two areas. We'll see if the Knicks are able to clean things up and get back to the level that they'd established in those areas. To me, that Charlotte game, a lot of it is fatigue coming off that 2 overtime win in Boston. Players didn't want to use that as an excuse, but I think it's reasonable to expect the Knicks to get back to the level they had played prior to that once they get on this road trip and get things started.
Yeah, I know Julius Randle has said a couple times over the last week or so that there's some tiredness creeping in, there's some fatigue, but they'll never use that as the excuse for performance. I also think one of the reasons why they almost ended up letting that Celtics game go just because of defensive rebounding solely, and that also hurt them against the Hornets. So, Ian, before I let you sign off, The Knicks have 15 games left. They have 39 wins right now. How many games are they winning this season? You go first, and then I'll go.
I think they'll get to 46, 47, which is a remarkable number considering where they came from last year.
Agreed. I was going to say 48, so I'm glad you didn't take my number.
There we go. There's our win predictions, everybody. Matt, thank you for jumping on here and having fun with us. And guys, we'll be back next Wednesday for a live edition of the Putback, talking more about what's happened over this road trip and what's happening moving forward with this team as they march closer towards a playoff berth. We look forward to seeing everybody then. And thanks for joining us.